I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9:30 on Tuesday the 30th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Dawn Neeson. Our main story, oh my, what a story it is. Eamon Holmes, our very own, hits out at Philip Schofield.
And the toxicity is not with me, Dan Wootton, or anyone else. The toxicity is with you and your mates in management.
Ooh, controversial stuff there. The questions for TV bosses mount up about what? Who knew what, when and how about Philip Schofield's affair with a younger member of staff? Eamon says there was a cover-up.
Feels like there was one to me. Now, what's that, Boris, if you pardon the pun? Another row over the former Prime Minister over whether private messages from Boris and other senior ministers should be handed over to the COVID inquiry. Deadline of 4 o'clock this afternoon. From what we hear, the Cabinet Office is not going to comply.
I'm sorry, but why is he running in a shirt? Who goes running in a shirt? Those pictures are quite upsetting. But we move on. Let her speak. Academic Kathleen Stock gets the backing of the Prime Minister. She's speaking tonight in Oxford. Protests are expected because of her views on trans rights. But let us know all your thoughts on our talking points today. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, here's your morning news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good morning to you. It is 9:32 here in the GB newsroom. As you may have just been hearing, Eamon Holmes has described his former colleague Philip Schofield as a chief narcissist, accusing him of creating a toxic culture at ITV's This Morning. Schofield resigned from the broadcaster and was dropped by his agency after admitting to an affair with a young male colleague on the programme. In a GB News exclusive, presenter and former This Morning host Eamon Holmes says he believes executives at ITV knew about and covered up the affair to protect Philip and Holly Willoughby, as well as to protect the brand. Eamon also told us these revelations have given other former This Morning contributors the confidence to come forward.
Someone sent me this message last night. Hello, Eamon, I hope you and Ruth are well. Just wanted to tell you that the whole Philip Schofield scandal has actually given many ex-This Morning staff the courage to finally speak out. I left this morning with a payout and I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to cover up the bullying and power abuse.
Well, in a statement released this weekend, ITV confirmed it did investigate rumours of a relationship between Schofield and a fellow employee, and that both parties categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Schofield's agent at the time. The government has until 4 o'clock this afternoon to release more of Boris Johnson's unredacted documents to the COVID public inquiry or face criminal prosecution. The Cabinet Office is arguing some of the material is unambiguously irrelevant, their words. The chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, though, says she will be the judge of what is in its scope. Food inflation has slowed slightly in May after a year of record increases, but overall shop prices have still gone up. That's been driven by a jump in the price of shelf-stable items like coffee and chocolate, which has been eased by a marginal drop in fresh food products. The government is in talks with supermarkets to introduce caps on the price of essential items to help families deal with the rising cost of living. That's it for the moment. More, though, on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com. And now it's back to Andrew and Dawn.
Good morning, and to our top story straight away, because it's such a cracker. Eamon Holmes has claimed there was a total cover-up over Philip Schofield's affair with a younger man in an exclusive interview with GB News.
ITV has denied the allegations. They would, wouldn't they? Saying that they investigated when rumours of a relationship first surfaced, but both parties categorically and repeatedly denied them.
In a sit-down chat with our very own Dan Wootton, Eamon also called out what he saw as a culture of toxicity, I can't say that word, this morning.
In life, I've always had this belief that a lie unchallenged becomes the truth. So, although I don't want to stand up to Schofield constantly pointing out where he's lying, I feel I have to. Is he delusional? Does he imagine or is he so detached from real life at this morning that he didn't realise what was going on? I often say this to Ruth. I said, maybe he believes all this stuff. Maybe he did not see what went on actually because there's something wrong with him. But he is the chief narcissist. He is a complete and utter dyed-in-the-wool narcissist. Everything is about him.
What did you know about this young man? Because he was there a lot. He's been pictured on the sofa as a very young teenager sitting in between Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield. And then I remember working at ITV Daytime, and he was a non-negotiable part of Philip's life. Sometimes there would even be taxis ferrying this young man between the studio and Philip's house. So what did you know about him before he was moved on to Loose Women?
I didn't know, but I've subsequently found out from a very, very good source, because he would arrive much earlier in the morning than I would for the programme, that he was delivered from Philip's London home, usually on a Friday morning, because Thursday was playtime when he and Philip would hit the town. And then he obviously stayed overnight, and there are records to show that he was brought in the next day separately.
In cars paid for by ITV?
In cars paid for by ITV.
So the management would have had to have known about that, wouldn't they?
Unless Philip paid the bill separately, but it would still have to go through the accounts office that they would have seen that and known that. It's a total cover-up. Those in authority had to know. They had to know what was going on, and they thought they would dodge a bullet with this, which they do, and they do constantly. Because with Schofield talking about those who speak out against him, namely me, Amanda Holden, and you'll be included in the toxicity that goes on.
Dr. Ange too.
Dr. Ange, of course, as well. I think Philip is absolutely right about toxicity. But my friend, the toxicity is not with me, Dan Wootton, or anyone else. The toxicity is with you and your mates in management and everybody who kept you in power and in abusive power for so long. And if I'm guilty of anything, it's speaking up for all those researchers who you ignored, all those producers who you treated like dirt, all those people who are texting and phoning me and Dan Wootton and saying, we feel now empowered to come out and tell the public the truth. Because the truth is, The public can't handle the truth. The public don't want, they think you're a little broom cupboard person and they grew up with you and you're lovely and you're adorable and whatever. But you let your fame and your power corrupt you. And that's where we're at today. And if I'm guilty of anything, it's guilty of exposing you.
Well, he tells it as it is, doesn't he, Eamon
Fighting
Holmes?
talk.
My
I
word.
wouldn't want to cross Eamon, I must admit.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, an ITV spokesperson says, further to our statement on Saturday, ITV can confirm when rumours of a relationship between Philip Schofield and an employee of ITV first began to circulate in early 2020, ITV investigated. Both parties were questioned and both categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Philip's then agency, YMU. In addition, ITV spoke to a number of people who worked on this morning and were not provided with and did not find any evidence of a relationship beyond hearsay and rumour. Where were they looking, Dawn? Where were they looking?
Look, we all know people that work over there, and I'm sorry, I think if any of that behaviour was going on here now, obviously there is absolutely nothing going on between us, Andrew.
No.
Like, it make that clear. People would know.
Of course they would.
People would talk. And especially if you are someone's rock, you're their best friend, and you go on holiday together, and you didn't spot any of it.
Funny that. Philip's statement on Friday reveals that he lied to people at ITV. This is ITV still saying now, throwing him under a bus. Philip's statement on Friday reveals he lied to people at ITV, from senior management to fellow presenters to YMU, to the media and to others over his relationship.
Right, so shall we go and talk to our reporter, Ray Addison?
I think we should.
Ray is outside Television Centre in West London, where This Morning is filmed. Good morning, Ray. No Holly or Phil today, obviously, but the show always goes on, doesn't it? So what's happening this morning over there?
Well, the show continues today, but for how much longer, that's the question that people across the UK will be asking today. Certainly ITV's senior management will be in crisis talks, discussing certainly the bombshell interview that Eamon Holmes had last night with Dan Wootton here exclusively on GB News. Of course, Eamon Holmes revealing that in his opinion, ITV must have known what was going on. And of course, Eamon also revealing details of that so-called Thursday playtime when Philip Schofield would go out to party on a Thursday evening with that young male runner, and then the following morning that runner would then be taxied from Philip Schofield's house, according to Eamon, to the This Morning studios. Now, of course, ITV saying, yes, they were warned of this affair 3 years ago, but they carried out their own investigation and found no evidence of it beyond hearsay and rumour. And that begs the question for many people, was that investigation simply incompetent, or was there something more deliberate, perhaps a cover-up? Certainly some people suspect that might have been the case. Now, Eamon is demanding that ITV release the records of that so-called thorough investigation so that we can put some light on it and people can make up their own minds just how thoroughly it was carried out. He also says his phone has been overflowing with messages from members of staff, people who work at ITV and on This Morning, saying thank you for speaking out about the toxicity at This Morning and for sharing your own experiences as well. So what next for This Morning? Well, certainly we know that as it stands, the brand is tarnished. We know that there has been breaking over the weekend. GB News understands that one of the chief sponsors of the programme, Arnold Clark, has decided that they will not be renewing their contract with This Morning. And of course, that could mean that ITV is set to lose millions and millions of pounds in revenue. Eamon saying he doesn't think that Holly Willoughby will be back on that sofa ever, in fact, because of her own brand and the need to protect it. ITV saying that This Morning is not under review and there are no plans for the show to be axed. Time will tell.
Yeah, they sort of would say that. Do you remember, Carol, Dawn, going back a few years?
Oh, who's Carol?
Yeah, I was thinking of
Is there
Carol
something
Malone.
you want to... right, OK.
No,
Carol is lovely, by the way,
She was on the News of the World, and almost out of the blue, over some of the phone hacking allegations, Rupert Murdoch closed down a very successful newspaper.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Profitable,
and
doing very well. And he closed it down.
Closed it down straight away. That's instant reaction. And I'm sorry. I mean, you know, we respect the statements that have been made completely, obviously. But if you remember back to the National TV Awards back in 2020, January 2020, when, incredibly unusually, when This Morning won, a certain young man, this particular young man, got up on stage, even though he was just a runner at the time, with all the stars.
Yeah.
Now, why would you do that?
Because he was a non-negotiable part of Philip Schofield's life.
Right, OK. But you know, they've investigated and there was nothing untoward going on at all.
No. And the Mail, my own paper, of course, revealed that Philip Schofield met this young man when he was 15.
Yes.
You've no idea when it turned into a sexual relationship.
Well, Philip Schofield said nothing illegal happened.
Exactly.
It was unwise.
Yeah.
Very unwise.
Well, it could legally have started from his 16th birthday.
Yes, of course.
When Philip would have been about 53.
Yeah. People have affairs. People, look, shall I play devil's advocate slightly here?
Yeah, of course.
People have affairs at work, OK? Yeah. That happens. And it's, you know, the age gap is rather large. And you would have thought ITV would have had a duty of care to look after a particularly very young runner. I didn't think they could start work there until they were 18 as runners, but maybe, I don't know. But you would have thought there would be a duty of care. But, you know, people do have affairs at work. So, in theory, Philip Schofield has done nothing wrong, and the fallout of this, some would say, has turned into a witch hunt.
Well, what he's done wrong is lied. Because he lied.
It's the cover-up, isn't it? That's always the thing.
It's what gets politicians all the time. It's often not the offence, it's the cover-up.
The cover-up.
Think Richard Nixon and Watergate. Boring break into some political offices, and they lied and lied and lied, and it brought down a president. Yeah,
that's exactly the thing, is it? Whether it's in politics or TV, or probably every walk of life, OK? You can do pretty hideous things, but as long as you come clean...
Fall on your sword, be honourable, and tell the truth.
Yes.
That's where it's gone horribly wrong.
Exactly. But what is unprecedented in this is like, they keep issuing statements.
They do.
Digging holes for themselves.
Yeah. Now, on other news, the government is going to have, well, it could be as soon as 4 o'clock today, a legal showdown with the pandemic inquiry, because Lady Hallett, Baroness Hallett, who is conducting that inquiry, she's a former judge, she says she wants Boris Johnson's WhatsApps and diaries from the pandemic and lots of WhatsApps to other ministers all handed over.
Wow. Baroness Hallett, the inquiry's chairwoman, wants to see the unredacted messages between Johnson, Sunak, Hancock and dozens of others.
Now, she's already had 50,000 documents relating to Boris Johnson.
Them?
I mean, who is going to read all? So, if you think this inquiry is going to be over any time soon, forget it. It'll be at least 5 years, in my prediction. That'd be my prediction.
So, is this sort of like, you know, the ultimate kicking it into the long grass?
Well, the Iraq War inquiry was published in 2013. The war in Iraq was 2003.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
10 years, Bloody Sunday, 40 years after the event.
And how much did they cost?
Lots of money.
We've got loads of money to spare on this sort of thing, though, obviously.
Well, anyway, till 4 p.m. today, that's when the government has to provide all the material, or they face a potential challenge to the ruling.
Right, OK. Well, let's get more on this, shall we? Political editor at HuffPost UK, Kevin Schofield, joins us now. Good morning, Kevin. There you are. Right, OK, so bring us up to speed on what's happening today. We've got this 4 o'clock deadline, but there is a legal deadlock going on, so what's happening?
Yeah, you're right. So, as you said, the chair of the inquiry wants access to all of these notebooks and WhatsApp messages between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, for instance, many senior figures in government at the time. And she wants full access to all of them. Now, the Cabinet Office have said that a lot of them are completely irrelevant to the COVID inquiry, and they're not going to hand them over. So, you know, as you say, there's a 4 p.m. deadline, but as things stand at the moment, it looks like this one is probably heading for the courts. And that's before we get to the actual inquiry itself. So it's all turned into a bit of a mess.
It's a mess, Kevin, because the government set up the inquiry. They asked, presumably, Lady Hallett to chair it, and now they could end up in court before anything really happens. But this isn't Boris's decisions, my understanding, Kevin. It is the Cabinet Office which is saying no to Lady Hallett.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. And, I mean, the thing is, if you set up a public inquiry, you know, it's easy to set them up. It can solve a political problem in the short term. You say it's going to be a public inquiry, kicks it into the long grass a little bit. But the law of unintended consequences then comes into play, and it looks as though the government is now squeamish, to put it mildly, at the prospect of a lot of these messages being released. Now, I would imagine, the ones that have absolutely no relevance whatsoever to the pandemic outbreak won't ever be released into the public eye. However, the concern is, I suppose, that they're going to have a lot of these private messages, quite off the cuff messages, I would imagine, between ministers at the time and Boris Johnson. Obviously, if you remember, it was a very highly pressured, uncertain time, and it could potentially be pretty embarrassing. So you can understand from a government point of view why they might not want these messages to be released unredacted. However, I think for the inquiry to have any credibility at all, then the chair of the inquiry needs to have full access to everything that she wants to see.
You can imagine what they're worried about, ministers, at Boris as well, is the odd gag they made in a WhatsApp message.
Yes.
Gallows humour, which then, when seen in the context of the inquiry and all those people dying, people wouldn't see the funny side of it.
You take it out of context, absolutely.
That's going to be the worry, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we probably wouldn't want people seeing our own WhatsApp messages, because a lot of them you're not even thinking half the time when you send off a quick, off-the-cuff message. But, as I say, at that time, it was very highly pressured. We obviously saw the WhatsApp messages that were released by Isabel Oakeshott when she did the Matt Hancock book, and the political storm that those caused. Now, if you can imagine, that would be tenfold if it involved Boris Johnson as well. And as I say, this is before the inquiry even begins in earnest. And I agree with you, Andrew. I think this is going to go on for years. These inquiries tend to turn out that way. And I think a lot of the time the public think, can we not just move on, perhaps? However, as I say, if you've set up a public inquiry and the chair wants access to documents, then you've got to hand them over, or else the inquiry is compromised.
I was like, Kevin, what's the alternative to, if handing over all the messages? Is there an alternative way of getting the information that they require?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to see. I mean, if the inquiry is to have any, as I say, credibility at all, they need to have access to all of this information. They want to know what senior figures were saying, communicating with the Prime Minister at the time, how decisions were made, bad decisions as well as good decisions, in order to carry out the inquiry in the proper manner, and also to learn lessons from the pandemic if, God forbid, we have another one, so that those lessons can be learned and better systems can be put in place. So yeah, it's I think it's going to be very uncomfortable for the government, and their lawyers are going to have to work very hard, I think, to convince the courts that these documents shouldn't be handed over.
I mean, we're not quite... I think Boris is giving evidence much later, Kevin, but for Rishi Sunak in charge of the government, of course, he'll be challenged too, because he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer coming up with the furlough scheme and all the fraud that was associated with that. But he's desperately trying to get the political initiative away from the Labour Party, because they're still way behind in the polls. But if this COVID crisis inquiry dominates the headlines for days and weeks on end, it's going to be very difficult for Rishi Sunak to get people thinking about other things.
Well, you're right, and obviously we saw the story last week at the Cabinet Office referring these documents to the police, entries in Boris Johnson's diary, and the last thing that Number 10 want is for more headlines about Partygate, because it just brings back all those memories that people have, and the unpopularity of the government when those stories first broke, and they want to move on, certainly, from that episode. But the longer these things are in the headlines, the more difficult it becomes for the Conservatives.
All right.
Can I just one quick question, Kevin, about your surname? What's it like being a Schofield at the moment?
It's absolutely fine. No one's said anything to me. I mean, I've had it for years. People, when they say your surname, they always say, "Are you any relation to Philip?"
Maybe he's a distant cousin, Kevin. Maybe he's a distant cousin.
Well, it must be very distant, because he's been on the go for 40 years, and I've never been able to establish a connection up until
probably
now.
Not.
So I think
not a good time
now. That he's not a family member.
All right, that's Kevin Schofield. Political editor of the HuffPost. Thanks for joining us. Terrific, thank you. That's a very good point. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says feminist professor... Do we have to call her feminist? Professor Kathleen Stock should be allowed to deliver a speech at Oxford University urging students to engage with the academic views even if they disagree with her.
Now, this comes ahead of planned protests by trans activists against Stock, who had to quit her job at the University of Sussex after being targeted, actually death threats, over her views on gender identity.
And her views on gender identity, Dawn, reflect the views of the majority of us.
52% of the population, for sure, pretty much.
Women, yeah.
Women.
She maintains, does Kathleen Stock, she's a moderate and has the right to upset people. So we're asking this morning, should Kathleen Stock be allowed to speak?
So let's get the thoughts of the sports director at Fair Play for Women, Fiona McNeena. Good morning, Fiona. Thank you so much for joining us today. So what do you make of it? I mean, you know, this is about free speech, this issue. So let's just talk about the aspects of free speech and the fact that, you know, Kathleen was tried to shut down, but now she is allowed to speak. This is a good thing for all of us, isn't it? Not just women.
Yeah, I think it's good and I think it's necessary. The areas of speech that might be contentious are exactly the ones that we need to allow people to say, because this is an area of highly contested policy, for example. And if women are not allowed to express our concerns and our needs, then we're going to end up with very bad policies. And some would say we already have. So I think that the more contentious an area of speech is, the more we have to protect people's right to say it. And that's what Kathleen Stock has said too. She is quite moderate, actually. You know, it's not unreasonable, is it, to say that people can't change sex? I'd love to hear the other side. I'm sure it would offend me, but I'd love to hear it.
So we are expecting protests tonight at the university, and Kathleen has spoken at length about how she's had to hire security. It's affected her mental health. How do you think she's feeling about actually giving the speech tonight?
I think it's a really tough situation she's been put in, and I'm full of admiration for her, for the courage she's shown and the dignity she's shown. And I've actually been a bit shocked at how aggressive some of the media have been towards her, because she's speaking for many of us. You know, a few of us get the opportunity to express these views. Many people do not, because they're afraid they might lose their job. They certainly may lose friends, relationships. There's a lot of anxiety and difficulty around discussing women's rights and women's needs. It's a great shame. We thought it was something that was settled, that women and girls need certain provision in order to be safe, in order to have opportunities. And it seems like it's not acceptable anymore to talk about that. So Kathleen is doing a service on behalf of many of us, including those young people at Oxford University who want to protest her. I think it's a great shame that they haven't yet understood that.
Indeed.
I think we're having trouble with the line there as well. That's Fiona McNeena, Sports Director, Fair Play for Women. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
And the Prime Minister's waded into this debate. He's written an article in the Daily Telegraph today saying why academics should be allowed to speak. Universities are meant to be hotbeds of learning and debate and discourse. They shouldn't be shutting people down because they don't agree with what they're thinking.
That was the whole point of going to university, to be able to have a debate, to listen to other views, to widen your horizons.
And in the coming days, the Prime Minister is going to announce the name of... he's called Professor Arif Ahmed of Cambridge University. He's going to be Director of Freedom of Speech and Academic Freedom. How appalling that he has to do that.
Well, we actually need someone at our university. The hotbeds of learning.
Great democracy of ours.
It's just appalling. Right, any case, still to come, much more on this as well. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is preparing to launch a legal battle with the Cabinet Office as the deadline approaches to hand over his WhatsApp message to a COVID inquiry. All to come on To The Point on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday the 30th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson. Our main story, oh my, and how Eamon Holmes hits out at Philip Schofield.
And the questions for TV bosses mount up about who knew what when about Philip Schofield's affair with a much younger member of staff. Eamon says there was a complete cover-up.
And a WhatsApp row involving Boris Johnson and whether private messages from the Prime Minister to ministers and other senior aides during the pandemic should be handed over to that COVID public inquiry.
And Let Her Speak, academic Kathleen Stock gets the backing of the Prime Minister. She's speaking tonight in Oxford. Protests are expected because of her views on trans rights.
And the hospitality industry is calling for more government support. Their energy bills have soared 81%, with less than a third of businesses optimistic about the future. We know a lot of them closed down, Dawn, during the pandemic.
Doing my bit.
Yeah, certainly.
But this is all about what you think, so let us know what you think on all of our talking points today. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, here's your morning news with Aaron Armstrong.
I respect the penny.
Good morning, it's 10:02. I'm Aaron Armstrong. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB newsroom. Eamon Holmes has described his former colleague Philip Schofield as a chief narcissist, accusing him of creating a toxic culture at ITV's This Morning. Schofield resigned from the broadcaster and was dropped by his agency after admitting to an affair with a young male colleague on the programme. In a GB News exclusive, former This Morning host Eamon Holmes says he believes executives knew about and covered up the affair to protect Philip and Holly Willoughby as well as the brand. Eamon also told us these revelations have given other former This Morning contributors the confidence to come forward.
Someone sent me this message last night. Hello, Eamon. I hope you and Ruth are well. Just wanted to tell you that the whole Philip Schofield scandal has actually given many ex-This Morning staff the courage to finally speak out. I left this morning with a payout and I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to cover up the bullying and power abuse.
In a statement earlier, ITV confirmed it did investigate rumours of a relationship between Schofield and a fellow employee, and confirmed that both parties categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Schofield's agent at the time. Ministers could be locked in a legal battle with the COVID-19 inquiry over the release of unredacted documents belonging to Boris Johnson. The Cabinet Office, which has until 4 o'clock today to respond, argues it's not obligated to disclose what it calls unambiguously irrelevant material. Well, the inquiry chair, Baroness Hallett, disagrees and has accused ministers of misunderstanding the breadth of the investigation. Food inflation has slowed ever so slightly in May after a year of record rises, but overall inflation in shops did rise to an all-time high. The rate fell slightly to 15.4% in the year to May. That's compared with 15.7% in April. That's according to the British Retail Consortium. Prices for fresh food, like fruit and milk, have fallen marginally. That's largely driven by lower energy costs. However, the price of room temperature items, like coffee and chocolate, has jumped. And it means groceries that cost £20 a year ago now cost £23. Meanwhile, hospitality businesses are asking the government for more support to help deal with rising costs. Pubs, bars and restaurants say their average bills have increased by 81%. Over 80% of establishments say they are being pushed to breaking point. The Prime Minister says the feminist professor Kathleen Stock should be allowed to deliver a speech at Oxford University. Rishi Sunak says the debate is a hallmark of a tolerant society. However, the university's LGBTQ+ society says it's standing up for trans rights. Professor Stock quit her job at the University of Sussex after being targeted by activists over her views on gender identity. In a 2021 book, she questioned the idea that gender identity is more significant than biological sex. At least one person's been killed in Kyiv after Russia attacked the city for the third time in 24 hours. Well, Ukrainian authorities say more than 20 drones were intercepted by its air defences, although several buildings were damaged. The latest strike is Moscow's 17th attack on the Ukrainian capital this month. Meanwhile, Russia's accused Ukraine of launching a terrorist strike on Moscow this morning. The Kremlin claims drone attacks caused minor damage to several buildings. Russia's defence ministry says all 8 drones launched were intercepted. The Royal College of Psychiatrists says there is not enough time to establish a new system to protect vulnerable people. It comes after the Met Police say they'll no longer attend mental health incidents from September unless there's a threat to life. The move is designed to free up officers to spend more time on their core roles. But postnatal depression survivor Ivana Poku says those struggling with mental health problems won't have anyone to turn to.
When you're really struggling, you don't have often the time to think, who should I call or what should I do? And the number 999, it's engraved in our brains. And when we call the police, we have the reason for that, yeah? And sometimes you don't even know when the situation is severe, that, it's life-threatening. Sometimes it's just hard to say.
And the government's promising to crack down on vaping campaigns targeting children. Ministers say they'll close a loophole which allows retailers to give free samples of vapes to children in England. The Prime Minister says marketing aimed at young people is unacceptable. The government will also review banning retailers selling nicotine-free vapes to children younger than 18. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens, but now it is back to Andrew and Dawn.
Good morning and welcome back. Right to our top story. Eamon Holmes has claimed there was a total cover-up of Philip Schofield's affair with a younger man in an exclusive interview with GB News.
ITV, of course, has denied the allegation, saying they investigated when rumours of that relationship first surfaced, but both parties categorically and repeatedly denied them.
In a sit-down chat with our very own Dan Wootton, Eamon also called out what he saw as a culture of toxicity at This Morning.
In life, I've always had this belief that a lie unchallenged becomes the truth. So, although I don't want to stand up to Schofield constantly pointing out where he's lying, I feel I have to. Is he delusional? Does he imagine or is he so detached from real life at This Morning that he didn't realise what was going on? I often say this to Ruth. I said, maybe he believes all this stuff. Maybe he did not see what went on actually because there's something wrong with him. But he is the chief narcissist. He is a complete and utter dyed-in-the-wool narcissist. Everything is about him.
What did you know about this young man? Because he was there a lot. He's been pictured on the sofa as a very young teenager sitting in between Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield. And then I remember working at ITV Daytime, and he was a non-negotiable part of Philip's life. Sometimes there would even be taxis ferrying this young man between the studio and Philip's house. So what did you know about him before he was moved on to Loose Women?
I didn't know, but I've subsequently found out from a very, very good source, because he would arrive much earlier in the morning than I would for the programme, that he was delivered from Philip's London home, usually on a Friday morning, because Thursday was playtime when he and Philip would hit the town. And then he obviously stayed overnight, and there are records to show that he was brought in the next day separately.
In cars paid for by ITV?
In cars paid for by ITV.
So the management would have had to have known about that, wouldn't they?
Unless Philip paid the bill separately, but it would still have to go through the accounts office that they would have seen that and known that. It's a total cover-up. Those in authority had to know. They had to know what was going on, and they thought they would dodge a bullet with this, which they do, and they do constantly. Because with Schofield talking about those who speak out against him, namely me, Amanda Holden, and you'll be included in the toxicity that goes on.
Dr. Range too.
Dr. Range, of course, as well. I think Philip is absolutely right about toxicity. But my friend, the toxicity is not with me, Dan Wootton, or anyone else. The toxicity is with you and your mates in management and everybody who kept you in power and in abusive power for so long. And if I'm guilty of anything, it's speaking up for all those researchers who you ignored, all those producers who you treated like dirt, all those people who are texting and phoning me and Dan Wootton and saying, we feel now empowered to come out and tell the public the truth. Because the truth is, the public can't handle the truth. The public don't want, they think you're a little broom cupboard person and they grew up with you and you're lovely and you're adorable and whatever. But you let your fame and your power corrupt you. And that's where we're at today. And if I'm guilty of anything, it's guilty of exposing you.
Strong stuff indeed. Right, an ITV spokesman has said, further to our statement on Saturday, ITV can confirm that when rumours of a relationship between Philip Schofield and an employee of ITV first began to circulate in early 2020, ITV investigated. Both parties were questioned and both categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Philip's then agency, YMU. In addition, ITV spoke to a number of people who worked on This Morning and were not provided with and did not find any evidence of a relationship beyond hearsay and rumour. Philip's statement on Friday reveals that he lied to people at ITV, from senior management to fellow presenters to YMU to the media and to others over this relationship. Right, OK. Well, interesting stuff, isn't it? This story is not going to go away no matter how much, but joining us now to talk more about it is Charlotte Griffiths, a journalist at the Mail on Sunday. The Mail newspapers are the ones that have had this exclusive pretty much from day one, been investigating it, yes. Yep. Oh, yes, you work there, don't you? I was ignoring that fact.
I do.
Whatever. Charlotte.
Hi, Charlotte.
Do you want to interview your colleague?
No, Charlotte.
No, Charlotte.
How much longer do you think, Charlotte, is the ITV position sustainable? That they knew nothing, they conducted inquiry, nobody seemed to know anything about it, when we've already heard from this young man who none of the newspapers have named, that he was never talked to, ever, by ITV about his relationship with Philip Schofield?
Yeah, I think it is unsustainable because one of the Eamon bombshells, I thought, was this Thursday night playtime, after which the boy would be delivered on Friday morning. Now, if there was any pretence, and I think there was a bit of pretence, that this was a mentorship, and that's why Phil was so unusually close with this particular runner, yet didn't know the names of any of the other runners or the researchers, which is what Eamon said. But if there was any pretends that their closeness was some kind of mentorship. Well, what kind of mentor delivers a young man on Friday morning to the studio, presumably having been out all night or late at night partying? It's not very good. It's not very good work ethic, is it? So I think that was, for me, the most sort of thing that sort of really highlighted how this was way more than just a mentorship. And ITV are going to have to answer some questions.
Do you think heads will roll over this one? The higher-ups are going to have to, as we referred to earlier on, to a certain extent, what happened with the News of the World? Scandal, shut down, gone. So do you think that heads will roll over this one?
I do think heads will roll. I do think heads will roll because, you know, this idea that they need to come up with exactly when this young man was questioned, how often, and was there a record of it? And if there wasn't, then heads are going to have to roll.
What about the other issues for ITV? We know the sponsor for this morning is not renewing the contract. Are other advertisers beginning to peel away?
Yeah, I'd be very surprised if there weren't a few more announcements as this goes on. They might actually sort of get rid of a few people at the top in order to kind of get ahead of that and show that they are actually doing something, because they can't afford to lose too many more advertisers. I think this will be the week where, I think the share price has already dropped a little bit. I think this will be the week where we see either advertisers start saying they're not renewing their contracts in their droves, or we're going to see some heads roll, or maybe a combination of the two. But I think this is the crucial week, and this is where it's all going to kick off. The bank holiday's over, and action needs to be taken.
And final quick question: Holly is meant to be back on Monday, I believe. Yeah. Do you think she'll come back?
Yes, I think no decision will be made. I think it'll be right up to the wire. Wow. I think they will probably keep talking about it. I mean, literally till Sunday, if nothing happens before then. But she's absolutely determined to come back. She's saying, "Listen, I had nothing to do with this. See you on Monday." But I think it'll be a minute by minute. I think they're going to white knuckle it. That's what I keep thinking. They're going to white knuckle this like a roller coaster all the way to the end of the week, and then a decision will be made. And whatever happens on Monday, so if Holly's not there on Monday, then I think the future of the show is completely in question.
Yeah.
What they can do instead, Charlotte, is turn over to GB News and watch us.
Yeah, scoop breakers.
Exactly. Great to talk to you. That's Charlotte Griffiths, my colleague from The Mail on Sunday. Now, we've been talking about Boris Johnson. He's never far away from the front pages, is he?
It's a dynamic duo this morning, isn't it? You've either got Boris Johnson or Philip Schofield.
Well, there's a potential legal showdown with the pandemic inquiry. It's been running for some weeks anyway, but the public evidence sessions start in the next few weeks. And Lady Hallett, who is chairing this inquiry, she wants all of Boris Johnson's WhatsApps and diaries in this pandemic, conversations with ministers, to be handed over. The Cabinet Office, not Boris, is saying no.
Yeah, and this is all the WhatsApps between him and Sunak and Hancock and probably his mother-in-law and everybody. I mean, would you hand your phone over?
No, and you absolutely know that some of these messages, they're going to be read in the cold light today in a public inquiry, I think, oh my God, how could he have been so tactless? It would be gallows humour, jokes made, which in the pressure cooker of number 10. I wouldn't want all my WhatsApps to be ventilated in public.
No, I wouldn't want yours read out in public either.
I've seen some of yours.
You promised not to mention that one. It was gallows humour.
Exactly. Now, ministers have got until 4 o'clock today to provide this material, or there could be a legal challenge to the ruling. Our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Westminster for more. Darren, morning. Is your hunch still that the Cabinet Office are not going to blink?
Yeah, that certainly seems to be the suggestion so far this morning, Andrew. As you say, we have ended up in this rather extraordinary situation where an inquiry the government itself has set up, led by Baroness Hallett, as you say, are now at odds, more than at odds, potentially in a legal wrangling with the government itself. Baroness Hallett is making the case that it is up to her and inquiry team. You've got a pretty wide scope looking at the pandemic, looking at those decisions around lockdowns, looking at the decisions around some of the restrictions that are imposed to decide in the end what they think is relevant to the inquiry or not. That's why they want access to all these WhatsApp messages, as you say, which includes messages to dozens of different ministers and officials and diary entries as well, to decide whether it's pertinent to the public inquiry. Clearly, if they decide some of it is, it would get into the public domain. Now, the Cabinet Office think it is their decision to make whether they think it is relevant or not to the inquiry. That's where they're at the moment. Also, ministers behind the scenes are pretty wary about setting a precedent here where messages that were not meant for public viewing could potentially end up in an inquiry years down the line, what impact that might have on the functioning of government. All in all, though, Boris Johnson's actually standing back from this, saying it is up to the Cabinet Office to decide on this very point, though he has, of course, changed his legal team in the last couple of weeks, particularly in the wake of the Cabinet Office itself reporting some of his diary entries to 2 different police forces around allegations of covert-breaking gatherings in Downing Street and in Chequers. As for the opposition, they're claiming yet again this is a sign that Rishi Sunak is too weak to act, that he's beholden to Boris Johnson and his supporters, and that's why he's refusing to hand things over. The deadline is 4 o'clock today. After that, as I say, things could be heading for the courts.
Right, that's Darren McCaffrey, our political editor at Westminster. Fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating. And as I said, it's like, while I think everybody out there, we all went through so much horrible stuff with the pandemic and the way the government behaved, there are lots and lots of questions to answer. We obviously need an investigation. We obviously need answers. Lots of people lost loved ones. But as you say, Andrew, this is going to take years. It's going to cost a lot of money. And we're getting down this rabbit hole of arguing about WhatsApp messages.
Even before it started proper, if you like. Even before they started giving evidence in public. Well, let's get some more analysis from the MP for Wokingham, who is, of course, the Conservative Sir John Redwood. Sir John, good morning.
Good morning.
Is it... Who decides, frankly? Is it the chairperson of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, or is it up to the Cabinet Office what is handed over?
I think it has to be an agreement. The public will want reassuring that the inquiry can have all relevant information. And the Cabinet Office and the ministers and senior officials involved will obviously want to make sure that details of their private lives or comments that aren't really relevant to the inquiry are protected from wider public view, because one of the problems with the WhatsApp generation is that they seem to blur private observations, bits of their private life and their public duties, and so there may well be things on the WhatsApp strand that are relevant to the inquiry, but there would also be things that people wouldn't normally want to publish more widely. So I think there is a sort of sloppiness in the way that some things were handled. What I hope it doesn't detract from is the really serious purposes of this inquiry, which should be to explore how prepared was the NHS for this kind of thing. Could you be properly prepared for it? Did they respond quickly when they saw what was happening? How good was the science? How much diversity of thought was there in the science? Did ministers have the right information coming to them to make those very difficult decisions? And I think it will be very interesting to see the details of the battle that was clearly going on, with some ministers seriously worried, as I was from the outside, about the economic damage and querying whether you needed such an intense and long lockdown, and those who were on the House side of the argument who wanted to take the safety first approach come what may, and thought it was just better to lock down everybody for as long as possible.
I'm glad you mentioned the length of the lockdown, Sir John, because Boris Johnson, as you will recall, was criticised by Labour for not closing down the economy quicker, and I thought it was actually rather noble of a Conservative Prime Minister to resist shutting down the economy because he knew the huge damage it would do to homes, schools, businesses, and we're still picking up the bill for it today.
Well, indeed, and I think that is one of the serious issues we want to know about. Obviously, everybody with loved ones who died and got seriously ill will want to know that everything possible was done to have protected them and help them and to treat them. There's a lot of issues about were the right medicines which were already available got to us quickly enough, and what kind of medical opinions came in about all that. But we certainly need to test the hypothesis that if we'd followed, say, the Swedish approach of bit less lockdown, less severe, would it have been worse from the health point of view, or might it have been okay?
Just one final quick question for you. Do you think there is another fair way of having the inquiry without releasing all the WhatsApp messages?
Well, I think there should be an agreement which is satisfactory to those conducted the inquiry. As I said at the beginning, I think what they should want is to have access to all relevant information and exchanges that throw light on why we locked down and what we did about gaining medicines and how quickly we got a vaccine. But they shouldn't want to allow publication of details of people's private lives or offhand remarks under pressure, which are too exciting, but which just happen when you're working all the hours God made and you're up against something you don't properly understand. I think there needs to be some balance, but that surely is what you have somebody leading an inquiry to do. They need to show that skill, and the Cabinet Office have got to accept they have a right to see a lot of material, but there should be some kind of agreement over which material is relevant to their publication.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That's Sir John Redwood, MP, joining us from Workingham this morning. Thank you very much. Right, still to come. Could we see a cap on food prices? Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, will join us in the studio. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:28, you're to the point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson. We've all been tightening our belts recently. Prices, mortgages, all rising. And this month's food inflation may be easing, but it's still alarmingly high. So what was the government solution? To ask retailers to put a cap on food prices.
A voluntary cap? Hold on. Right, and despite interest rates rising, new research shows many high street banks are not passing on the returns to their savers. That's the thing, isn't it? With some customers being shortchanged by hundreds of pounds.
Our in-house economics guru, he's our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, is here with us now. Good morning, Liam. Liam, price caps, the Prime Minister, keep your nose out. Isn't that the point?
It's taking us back to the days of Edward Heath, Andrew,
yes.
when you and I were brushing our teeth by candlelight.
We were. Because of the 3-day week.
Spam fritters, do you remember?
We were.
Yeah, and I obviously didn't brush my teeth ever or eat spam fritters, even though I was very much alive, Liam, but thank you for the compliment. But back then it was compulsory, wasn't it? This is voluntary, isn't it?
It is voluntary. Before we get on to the cap, let's just have a look at the inflation numbers that are driving this. The Telegraph reported over the weekend that the government's thinking about suggesting a food price cap. I'm not sure it will work, but let's have a look at the numbers. Now, I've got a graphic here. Last week, we learnt that on ONS, these are official Office for National Statistics measures, food price inflation in March was 19.2%, and then it came down marginally in April to 19.1%. These are official numbers. Then on top of that, Dawn and Andrew, you've got the BRC, the British Retail Consortium. That's like an independent survey measure, very, very highly regarded. That's showing food price inflation at April's slightly lower, 15.7%. And this morning, BRC said, their numbers come out before the official numbers, that in May, food price inflation is 15.4%. So hardly light at the end of the tunnel, but at least it seems to be going in the right direction. And this is the political environment. This is the reality that Downing Street is dealing with, and it's introducing ideas. But is this the right idea, to ask supermarkets to put a cap on certain goods? I don't think it is. I don't think it's going to work. There's a scheme that's similar in France. France is a much more statist economy than us. It's many of the big supermarkets in France aren't adopting it. It seems to be a bit like the government trying to say, it's not us, Gov, it's the food retailers, without actually really getting in the face of the food retailers and saying in public, why are food prices still so high when across the world food prices have been falling?
They had that summit, number 10, didn't they, with food retailers or supermarkets. But what came of it?
Was it farm to fork or something? Yes.
You're right, there were two summits and they seem to get slightly tougher or slightly less cuddly over so there was the Farm to Fork summit a couple of weeks ago, which was basically let's get a few celebrity chefs in to pose on the steps of Downing Street, because that's going to help you when you're trying to buy, make your weekly, make ends meet when you go into your local supermarket. And then when they, I don't know. But the day before the inflation numbers came out last week, the headline of which was this still massive food price inflation, which I just referred to, 19.1%. There was a hastily convened meeting in the Treasury, not Number 10, the Treasury,
that's right,
with Jeremy Hunt and some of the big food retailers. And the Treasury let it be known, ringing up people like me, say, oh, the CMA were there as well, the Competition and Markets Authority, just to make it sound a little bit more adult. But the form of words that came out, the communique from the Treasury, the readout, again, it was very soft-focused. It was very cuddly. It wasn't as if the government was saying to the food retailers, look, we want you to sort this out, guys, because this is massive. And it seems to us, while there are issues in the supply chain, while energy prices are still high, while labour costs are still high, you need labour, you need energy to process food. And, of course, there's a lag. And a year ago, fertilisers prices were high, even though they've come down now. I do think there's a sense that the food retailers are protecting their margins while really squeezing the farmers' margins and really squeezing the consumers. I think that's fair to say. The perception is there, and I don't think the idea of a voluntary food price cap is going to really butter any parsnips, as my old mum would say.
They should have made him do the walk of shame up Downing Street, and we should have named them and shamed them, and then there should have been a really tough readout from the Prime Minister and the Chancellor straight afterwards.
Because not all supermarkets put their prices up. Aldi actually managed to, on average, decrease their prices.
That's a really good point, Dawn. Aldi, Lidl and the other discounters are taking market share from the big guys, particularly Tesco, Sainsbury's and Waitrose, which is more at market. But that is happening, but still, Tesco, Sainsbury's, they dominate the market share. Aldi and Lidl, their share is growing, but it's still relatively small, and that's a problem.
Right. I think we're running out of time. Thank you very much. Right, still to come, the government is hoping to crack down on vape promotions targeted at children. But what's taking them so long? Find out after your morning news with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 10:34, Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Eamon Holmes has described his former colleague, Philip Schofield, as a chief narcissist, accusing him of creating a toxic culture at ITV's This Morning. Schofield resigned from the broadcaster and was dropped by his agency after admitting to an affair with a young male colleague on the programme. In a GB News exclusive, former This Morning host Eamon Holmes says there were rumours about the affair, and he believes executives at ITV knew all about it and covered it up to protect Philip and Holly Willoughby, as well as the brand.
I didn't know anything. I heard some rumours. Where were you going to go to with these rumours? Who? You know, everyone was team Philip and Holly, and they were there together, they were seen together, they were the brand.
In a statement earlier, ITV confirmed it did investigate rumours of a relationship between Schofield and a fellow employee, and both parties categorically and repeatedly denied those rumours, as did Schofield's agent at the time. The government has until 4 o'clock this afternoon to release more of Boris Johnson's unredacted documents to the COVID public inquiry, or potentially face criminal prosecution. The Cabinet Office is arguing some of the material is, in their words, unambiguously irrelevant. Well, the chair of the inquiry, Baroness Hallett, says she'll be the judge of what is in the scope of the investigation. Food inflation has slowed slightly in May after a year of record increases, but overall shop prices have gone up. That's been driven by a jump in the price of shelf-stable items like coffee and chocolate, which has been eased slightly by a drop in fresh food products. The government is in talks with supermarkets to introduce caps on the price of essential items to help families deal with the rising cost of living. More on all those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2374 and €1.1566 euros. The price of gold, £1,570 and 44 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7613.
Direct Bullion sponsors the finance report on GB News, investments that matter.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've got plenty of people emailing in and tweeting in, all about Schofield, of course. Colin says, all the people who lose their jobs on Good Morning should get together and sue Schofield for loss of earnings.
But you know what? This is... I like this one as well, because I keep thinking this as well. Good morning, Calvin. Thank you for getting in touch. Thinking of the wonderful, hard-working members of the team behind this morning, they're the victims too. So we are talking about, you know, the young producers, the assistant producers. They're not on a lot of money.
No.
If they lose their jobs, it really is a big deal for them.
Yeah, because the show could go down. And Tristan says, if ITV really were arranging taxis to ferry Schofield's child victim, look, we think he was, we don't know what age he was when the relationship started.
As Schofield says, it was inappropriate, but it wasn't illegal.
But not illegal, yeah, exactly. So if it's 18, he's not a child. From his house to the studio mornings, how is it possible to claim ITV had investigated and found no evidence? They did investigate it.
But they said they investigated it, I believe.
Well, not very well.
Well, I mean, they did investigate, and obviously they ignore their taxi accounts, receipts, because ferrying...
And the fact that everybody at ITV was talking about it.
Yeah, but everyone's talking about our interview, or GB News interview. I mean, Dan and Eamon last night saying, this is Pauline, good morning, Pauline. Thank you, Eamon and Dan, for standing up to the establishment. It's about time someone did. Well, you can rely on GB News to do that.
You can, and you can rely on Nigel Nelson, who's our senior political commentator, and Tonya Buxton, our political commentator, who are with us. Philip Schofield. It's on 5 front pages today.
I admire you for saying ITV said they investigated and I believe them. Oh, please. Please, they just did not. They did not investigate in any form of an investigative manner. They might have made a small request and then moved it on.
They might have possibly asked someone, but
that's not an investigation.
That's what they say. Like, we have to.
But they're known to be lying, and they're known to be liars on other accounts, and as is Philip Schofield. So let's be the channel that actually calls it out properly, as Eamon has, and speaks the truth about what's going on and what goes on behind the scenes in television companies. Now, ITV are known to have this, keep the star safe. They, those above knew what was going on, and they just added petrol to the fire instead of calling him up straight away, telling him this isn't good enough and carrying on. And it's happened before with other people in a much worse way, as we know. We won't mention those other names, but it all comes to light eventually, all these famous people that are covered up for by those in the offices on high. And it's the people in the offices on high that need to come down.
Do you think Holly Willoughby, who claims she'd asked him about the relationship and he denied it, we've seen photographs of them at awards ceremonies together with the young man and Schofield. Do you think she didn't know?
Of course she knew. I mean, I would literally bet big money on it. I mean, do you have friends? Do you have friends? And do you know when friends of yours...
Bit of a leading question to Andrew.
Yeah, but do you know... I know when my friends are in a relationship with someone or whether it's not, and when you're so close and you go on holiday with someone... I mean, I don't know how she could stomach it. She was going on holiday with his wife and knew about this relationship, and it's all friendly. For me, it's brutally disloyal on so many levels. And, what we need on television and what this morning was supposed to be were our friends speaking honestly to us and having a completely transparent relationship, and that's not what was there. And we are, here at GB News, we're going to call it out every single step of the way.
It is a very tarnished brand now, and as we know, there are more stories to come.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
Nigel, do you think the programme is sustainable?
Well, I mean, I took the point that Dawn made a bit earlier by comparing it to the News of the World.
Yeah.
That if this morning's now become so toxic, and we've seen sponsors now starting to pull out, advertisers could follow, viewers could follow. If all that happens, and happens very quickly, I think This Morning has probably had it. I mean, what is obviously coming out is that people haven't been honest about what they appear to have known. I mean, I was on Dan Wootton's show last night when we saw the Eamon Holmes interview for the first time. And all of us, we weren't talking. Our jaws were just dropping with each revelation that Eamon came up with.
Thursday night play night, eh?
Thursday night play night. But if Eamon, who was there, was saying, look, we knew things were going on, this is the sort of thing that was happening, this was the way Philip Schofield was behaving. As Tonya's just mentioned, that investigation that ITV did doesn't seem to be much of an investigation.
No.
What they need now is to come clean about how well that investigation was conducted, and if it wasn't, have a new one.
And the young man in question, that we understand there are non-disclosure agreements around him which will expire quite soon. In which case, if he then goes public, that could be a pretty difficult time for ITV.
Well, it would. I mean, I'd be surprised if a non-disclosure agreement would cover everything that happened. I mean, it should be a non-disclosure agreement about what he knows about ITV.
Yeah.
So we will see. But obviously, should he decide to tell his story, this will go into a whole different realm.
Non-disclosure agreements in themselves are quite sinister, aren't they?
Yeah.
They say there's something to be covered up and lied about.
Yeah.
I mean, and so if you're transparent and talking and speaking the truth, what do you need that for?
And isn't there a great irony when it's a media company having non-disclosure agreements? The job of the media is to inform and to report facts, not to cover facts up.
I would have to say, in the defence of many media companies, it is a standard part of leaving that you do sign a non-disclosure agreement. So there might not be anything sinister. I'm not standing up for anyone here,
but, maybe
it does happen.
Maybe it's time for a change. Maybe a change in the way things are done.
Yeah, I mean, So when I left my newspaper, I signed one to not give trade company secrets away. So they're not that unusual. I don't think there's anything really untoward going on in this one. But talking of not disclosing things, see what's cunning link there? Nigel, this is your story. This is in the Times. This is Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages.
Yeah, so this is a row that will probably come to a conclusion about 4 o'clock this afternoon, where Heather Hallett, who is leading the COVID inquiry, will decide whether or not she will take legal action because the government won't release documents and WhatsApp messages that relate to COVID. Now, the government promised all along a full, independent, open inquiry. And suddenly they've changed their minds and say, well, hang on a second, we've got all these documents here that we think ought to be redacted because they might contain some embarrassing political information, that they're not relevant to the inquiry, so we'll send Heather Hallett a partial version of it. This is not on. I mean, it is quite clear that it should be for the inquiry chairman to decide what is relevant and what isn't. And what isn't relevant won't then go into the public domain. It's not up to ministers or the Cabinet Office to start shredding bits of them before they even get to her. And that's what's happening in this case.
Well, just some breaking news on this subject, actually, Nigel. Some breaking news. The COVID-19 inquiry said it has been told the Cabinet Office doesn't have Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages or notebooks, as the deadline to hand over the evidence was extended until Thursday afternoon.
Well,
so he's not handed them over to the Cabinet Office.
Hang on.
Which somebody says it doesn't.
This is extraordinary because how were they able then to tell the police there were things in those diaries?
Well, they're the diaries that were not his diaries. That's the diary I've written about this. That's the diary that's kept by civil servants, which is a detailed minute-by-minute account of the Prime Minister's working day, whether it's at Number 10, Chequers, or wherever. Boris would have had made no input into that. These are referring to his own diaries and WhatsApp messages.
Well, I'm astonished then that hasn't actually gone to the Cabinet Office.
Yeah, well, I am. But nothing really astonishes you, surely, Nigel.
Very experienced.
I mean, this does sound like a bit of a cock-up rather than a conspiracy. But I mean, certainly the basic principle is that Heather Hallett should have access to everything that is relevant.
Yeah. What do you think about this?
So I, as a member of the public, don't trust the civil service anymore. So I don't trust them with the COVID inquiry, number one. I think they're taking us down rabbit holes. And I think they keep, it seems to be kind of constantly coming back to, we didn't lock down fast enough. No, that's not... It's categorically starting to be proved now that lockdowns were a terrible thing. We can tell from what happened in Sweden that lockdowns shouldn't have happened. I don't care about these minute details about Boris. What I care about is coming out of this inquiry and making sure that lockdowns never happen again, because we know excess deaths, suicides, lost children, all the things that happen because of lockdown. And this is all kind of mucking up the water to actually prevent us from getting the true facts.
And it's also a lot about personality again here, isn't it? Boris was just... OK, he was Prime Minister, but there was a quad. The civil servants and the scientists were hugely involved in this. And you're right, I mean, it all becomes about that man Boris again.
Yeah.
But it could prevent future lockdowns, couldn't it? I mean, the whole point of the inquiry is to learn lessons about what happened, the decisions that were made over COVID. A lot of people feel that the lockdowns that came after the first lockdown, as Tonya does, were totally wrong. It may well be, that will be the conclusion of the inquiry. It wasn't necessary, it did too much damage to the economy. But those are the kind of lessons that we must learn just in case it happens again.
But also he got a lot of abuse for being slow to lock down the first time. And I remember arguing, actually, I thought it was quite, and I said this to John Redwood, quite noble of the British Prime Minister to be resisting pressure from the civil service law to close it down.
If he had resisted throughout, we wouldn't have all the collateral damage we have now. Our state, the way we are...
they'd have toppled him.
But isn't that the problem? That they decide who is the they, and it's the they are to blame, not whether. Boris didn't believe in the lockdown, so if he broke the rules.
And you had the Labour Party demanding, shouting louder and louder for more.
But it was the final for Boris. The final evidence came when he had that report from Imperial College. To say if you do nothing, 500,000 people will die. We don't know if that was true because it never happened.
But Imperial College got it wrong so many times. I mean, can't we take that
things like that aren't a prediction. This sort of modelling is not a prediction. It's a warning of what might happen. And on the basis of that, Boris Johnson, I think rightly, by the way, took the view we'll have to err on the side of caution, and hence the first lockdown.
But caution for whom? Caution for whom?
Us.
But it didn't work, did it? More people suffered. So there was no cost-benefit analysis to lockdown, and that's the thing that makes me so angry.
500,000 people didn't die. So
no, that's not true, Nigel. That's just not true.
Well, they didn't.
I mean, they didn't die, but not because we locked down.
Well, that's what the inquiry inquiry will have to decide. If the inquiry turns around and says, look, that lockdown wasn't necessary, I will certainly eat my words quite happily.
But the civil servants are doing the inquiry, so they're never going to come out with that, are they?
This is an independent inquiry. So Heather Hallett it doesn't have to actually respond to anybody. She hasn't got a boss in that sense. The only boss she has now is whether the courts go along with what she's demanding, which is that this material has to be released.
Did they perhaps set the terms of reference of this inquiry too wide?
Well, no, because what they're doing is they're breaching the terms of reference. That and the technical thing is Section 21 of the Inquiries Act 2005, and that gives her power to demand these very things. So all she's doing is exercising the power the law gives her, but a judge must now decide. If, provided the Cabinet Office don't release anything, a judge will have to decide whether or not this stuff now should fall into her hands.
But there are so many people out there that want answers and they don't want to wait years. And the government aren't great on getting inquiries done fast,
no,
are
they're
they?
Not. No. Look at Iraq.
No. Yes, yeah, thanks.
I give this at least 5 years.
Yeah, Nigel?
Well, I mean, she will have interim reports coming out, so it'll be a slightly different inquiry from previous
5 years? Higher?
I'd say 2 or 3.
Tonya? Higher?
Forever. It will roll. We'll never get the truth.
Tonya, talking of the truth, we're coming back to you now. This is the Telegraph. We have to be quite brief, unfortunately. The Telegraph, the Oxford trans row. Yes,
I'm really pleased that Rishi Sunak has come out in defence and said that we don't want a vocal few people stifling debate. So, you know, we are able to have conversations. This is the thing about cancel culture, and in particular, the trans lobby is so strong. You know, they don't want you to speak. I never understand that, because if you feel you're right, if I feel I'm right, I want to debate with you all day long, because I'm coming from...
Particularly to university.
Well, this is
a place of learning.
This is Kathleen Stock, isn't it, who's talking tonight in the debate.
Who's been hounded out.
And she hounded out of her job at a university because she takes the view she wants women... She doesn't believe you can be a trans woman.
All she did is she questioned whether gender identity is more important than biological sex, which, you know, I don't think anybody here could possibly believe. She just questioned that. And because of that, her life has been ruined.
Yeah, really has.
It really has.
And the Prime Minister's sticking up for her. Is he triggering a culture war in your view, Nigel? I think it was a very measured article in the Telegraph.
I mean, this is where Tonya and I can agree on this one. That,
well, that's unusual.
That's nice.
Obviously, free speech should trump everything else. I don't happen to agree with Kathleen Stock's view that a trans woman is not a woman, but she has every right to her opinion, every right to express it, and should do so at the Oxford Union tonight without being stopped or cancelled.
Right, well, I'm going to have to stop both of you. I'm not cancelling you because you are coming back in the next hour, which is rather lovely, so much more to come. Right, in the next few moments, we'll be speaking to a PR expert as the Schofield scandal at ITV reaches a crisis point.
Yeah, plus pubs and restaurants, they're now pleading with the government for actions on energy bills. We're going to be joined by a publican after the break.
More to come on that in the next hour. We're GB News, British News Channel.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. More fine weather to come today, in fact, for the rest of this week. It isn't sunny everywhere, quite a lot of cloud and quite a cool breeze blowing across parts of the east. This large area of high pressure will dominate our weather. That's what's keeping things dry. But around it, the breeze is picking up again over the Northern Isles, but also coming in across East Anglia and the south coast of England. So quite a brisk breeze here, and feeding quite a lot of cloud across these eastern counties of England. So some here staying fairly glum, and with that wind off the sea, feeling pretty chilly. Whereas for the west, lots and lots of sunshine, and that's where we'll see the top temperatures, 23, 24, perhaps even 25 in one or two places. Whereas on that east coast, we'll struggle to get beyond the mid-teens and feeling colder because of that breeze. Not a lot of change through the evening. If anything, overnight, that cloud will start to push back in across the Midlands and maybe even into parts of Wales, perhaps even as far as the southwest of England as well, and thickening up in eastern Scotland. Clearer skies could allow some mist and fog across Northern Ireland. Temperatures generally down to high single figures. Into Wednesday, we do start with fairly glum skies for many, actually. Only the westernmost coast kind of poking out, along with Northern Ireland seeing a sunny day. Much of western Scotland also. Now, that cloud should break up in quite a few places, but again, the east coast of England, east coast of Scotland, and on Wednesday, quite a bit of the Midlands may stay fairly cloudy. And if it does, temperatures will struggle. Again, feeling quite cold with the wind coming in from the North Sea. But for the west, again, in the sunshine, temperatures getting into the mid-20s, perhaps. Again, during Wednesday evening, that cloud is likely to come back inland as we go through the overnight period. The weather kind of not really shifting much throughout this week. High pressure keeping things dry, often quite cloudy with a brisk breeze in the east. Plenty of sunshine in the west. Goodbye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 a.m. on Tuesday, the 30th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Neeson. The deadline for the government to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages to the major COVID public inquiry has been delayed until Thursday. But the Cabinet Office says it doesn't even have them. Who's got them?
They're not specific about what Thursday in that one either. Like, pick a Thursday in about 10 years' time. Meanwhile, questions for ITV bosses mount up about who knew what, when, and what did they know about Philip Schofield's affair with a younger member of staff. Eamon Holmes says there was a cover-up. And pub restaurant owners are urging the government for support after they saw their energy bills soar 81%. But this isn't about what we think, it's about what you think. So let us know all about your feelings about all the stories we're covering. Email gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get you up to date on your morning's news with Aaron Armstrong.
Good morning to you. It is 11:11. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Cabinet Office has told the COVID-19 inquiry it doesn't have unredacted messages sent by the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson during lockdown. Now, previously, ministers refused to hand over the documents, arguing they're not obligated to disclose what they've described as unambiguously irrelevant material. The inquiry chair, Baroness Hallett, has disagreed with that and has accused ministers of misunderstanding the breadth of the investigation. She's extended the deadline to produce the documents from 4 p.m. this afternoon until Thursday. A spokesperson says the former Prime Minister does not object to disclosing this evidence. Eamon Holmes has described his former colleague, Philip Schofield, as a chief narcissist, accusing him of creating a toxic culture at ITV's This Morning. Schofield resigned from the broadcaster and was dropped by his agency after admitting to an affair with a young male colleague on the programme, which he'd previously lied about. In a GB News exclusive, former This Morning host Eamon Holmes says he believes executives at ITV knew about and covered up the affair to protect Philip and Holly Willoughby as well as the brand. Eamon also told us these revelations have given other former This Morning contributors the confidence to come forward.
Someone sent me this message last night. Hello, Eamon, I hope you and Ruth are well. Just wanted to tell you that the whole Philip Schofield scandal has actually given many ex-This Morning staff the courage to finally speak out. I left this morning with a payout and I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to cover up the bullying and power abuse.
Well, Eamon also stressed that any potential cover-up at the broadcaster may have been the result of incompetence. Earlier in a statement, ITV confirmed it investigated rumours of a relationship between Schofield and a fellow employee, and both parties categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Schofield's agent. Food inflation has slowed slightly in May after a year of record rises, but overall inflation in shops rose to an all-time high. The rate fell slightly to 15.4% in the year to May, compared with 15.7% in April. That's according to the British Retail Consortium. Prices for fresh food, like milk and fruit, have fallen marginally. That's been driven by lower energy costs. But the price of room temperature items like coffee and chocolate has jumped. And it all means that groceries that cost £20 a year ago will now cost around £23. Meanwhile, hospitality businesses are asking the government for more support to help deal with rising costs. Pubs, bars and restaurants say their average bills have increased by 81%. 8 out of 10 establishments say they're being pushed to breaking point. The Prime Minister says feminist Professor Kathleen Stock should be allowed to deliver a speech at Oxford University. Rishi Sunak says the debate is a hallmark of a tolerant society, but the university's LGBTQ+ society says it is standing up for trans rights. Professor Stock quit her job at the University of Sussex after being targeted by activists over her views on gender identity. She questioned the idea that gender identity is more significant than biological sex in a book published in 2021. At least one person's been killed in Kyiv after Russia attacked the city for the third time in 24 hours. Ukrainian authorities say more than 20 drones were intercepted. The air defences did their job, authorities say, although several buildings were damaged. The latest strike is Moscow's 17th attack on Kyiv this month. Meanwhile, Russia's accused Ukraine of launching a terrorist strike on Moscow this morning. The Kremlin claims drone attacks caused minor damage to several buildings. Russia's defence ministry says all 8 drones, though, were intercepted. The Royal College of Psychiatrists say there's not enough time to establish a new system to protect vulnerable people. The Met Office say they will no longer attend mental health incidents from September unless there's a threat to life, so that officers can focus on crime. However, postnatal depression survivor Ivana Polkus says those battling mental health illness won't have anywhere to turn.
When you're really struggling, you don't have often the time to think, who should I call or what should I do? And the number 999, it's engraved in our brains. And when we call the police, we have the reason for that, yeah? And sometimes you don't even know when the situation is severe, that it's life-threatening. Sometimes it's just hard to say.
Finally, the government is promising to crack down on vaping campaigns targeting children. They're saying they'll close a loophole allowing retailers to give free samples to children in England. The Prime Minister said earlier he is prepared to take further action to regulate the market and the promotion of vapes if necessary. The government will also review banning retailers selling nicotine-free vapes to those under the age of 18. This is GB News. We will bring you more as it happens, as always. Now, it is back to Andrew and Dawn.
Well, more shenanigans with Boris Johnson and the COVID inquiry. So the deadline for the government to give the COVID inquiry Boris Johnson's WhatsApps and diaries was supposed to expire at 4 o'clock today. It's been extended until Thursday. The Cabinet Office says he doesn't have them anyway.
Have them. I get the impression, the way things are going, this is more cock-ups and conspiracy.
Sounds like it.
I think so, don't you? Baroness Hallett, the inquiry's chairwoman, wanted to see all the messages between Johnson, Sunak, Hancock and dozens of others in unredacted form.
So our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood's here to unravel it all for us. Morning, Tom. So when did they realise they didn't have Boris Johnson's diaries and WhatsApp messages? Because it was all supposed to have been resolved at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah.
It was all supposed to be resolved, but of course there has been a great deal of consternation within government about this issue for quite some time. If we remember back to the context perhaps surrounding this, we need to look back at the so-called lockdown files published by The Telegraph. That was when Matt Hancock gave over his entire WhatsApp record to the journalist Isabel Oakeshott, and in breach of certain agreements, we saw those messages end up all across the news. Now, this inquiry, this COVID inquiry, is asking for the records not just of Matt Hancock, but also of Boris Johnson, of Liz Truss, of Rishi Sunak, of all senior members of the government. And understandably, perhaps, they're a little bit wary of where those messages and indeed all of that content might end up. And so what we are seeing now within the government is a bit of resistance to what the inquiry is asking for. The inquiry asking, of course, for unredacted and in full the records, the diary entries of Boris Johnson, the WhatsApp records of all of these senior government figures. The government, however, the Cabinet Office saying that they should decide what is relevant to this inquiry, that potentially diary entries about meetings that have nothing to do with COVID are not most important and not particularly relevant to this inquiry. However, of course, what we've heard on the side of the inquiry is that they would like to see everything so that they get to decide what is relevant. And they're saying that not everything will be published in the inquiry, but they should be able to see all of the documentation. And this is where this standoff has been brewing for several days. As for whether or not the Cabinet Office has actually known what information it holds, that's relatively unclear.
Where's this going to go, Tom?
There is a big question as to whether the government decides to judicially review the inquiry and the demand of this inquiry, which could kick the can to the High Court and could see the government really spending quite a fair bit of taxpayers' cash on expensive lawyers trying to say that it's up to them to decide what goes into this inquiry rather than those who run it. Of course, some might say, well, the government drew up the terms and the remit of the inquiry itself, so potentially that was a fault of the government's own making back at the start of this process. But in 2 weeks this inquiry is expected to get going in its formal capacity, and it needs to be collecting this evidence. So if there is a judicial review, if this is heard in the High Court, that would be sooner rather than later.
And And Tom, what's the feeling in Parliament at the moment about the fact that they haven't even got these diaries of WhatsApp messages? I mean, are people going, oh, God, I mean, there must be sort of like, I don't know, a certain amount of humour about the confusion over this.
Well, I think that the overriding feeling from those who are potentially implicated in these requests for information is that we don't want to end up like Matt Hancock. Of course, Matt Hancock handed over all of his information, and to some extent it came back to bite him. Really, there are so many people concerned that things that they said that weren't to do with the pandemic might end up in the wrong people's hands, or, as we've seen, through this government, sort of end up leaking its way one way or another into the press. We've seen that in many different departments, in many different contexts. So there is fear, I don't think is too strong a term, from some of those implicated. However, of course, there are many in Parliament who have been calling for this inquiry to get going sooner, who want it to have unfettered access to all of the communications, and who are concerned that if it's the politicians or the government saying what is the information that is relevant rather than the independent statutory inquiry, things could be missed.
Fascinating.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Tom Harmer, thank you very much. And very, very loud where you are, Tom, so well done there for getting the... explaining it so well.
Do you think Boris knows where these WhatsApp messages are? These diaries are? He was never a great one for detail.
No, that's true. Written down diaries, I can understand you putting in a... But doesn't your phone store WhatsApp messages? I don't know, I'm a bit of a numpty.
It's too technical for me. Look, we're getting lots of texts and emails coming in. Food prices, a lot of people are talking about that. Richard says, stop squabbling with the supermarkets, just lower our taxes so we can have more of our own money to pay normal market prices. Quite right, well said.
Yeah, but it's the supermarkets that are profiteering as well, so that's, right, and Leon says, good morning, Leon, I'm against such measures as it deters competition. However, I'm against unjustified profiteering, and that's my point. There's supermarkets making a lot more money. If their profit margin doesn't reflect the cost of living crisis, there will be unrest.
And on the WhatsApp row over Boris, Eileen says, if Boris Johnson has to hand his WhatsApp messages, does that mean everyone's private accounts could be in the public domain? Forcing Mr Johnson to release his private WhatsApp messages is the start of a slippery slope for all of us.
Well, thank you, Eileen. You know what? I read Eileen's message and I was thinking exactly the same thing. And I was just thinking, seriously, if I handed my phone over to you now, would I want you reading all my WhatsApp messages? Because my mums would bore you. Sorry, Mum, but, you know, it's like, you know, I'm still alive. Why haven't you phoned me? That's about as exciting as it gets. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I know what other sort of messages, WhatsApp messages.
Well, stop sending them to me then, honestly. I've told you before.
You know you like it.
And right, and talking of which, in other news, Eamon Holmes has claimed there was a total cover-up over Philip Schofield's affair with a younger man in an exclusive interview with GBNews.
ITV, of course, strongly denies the allegations, saying they investigated when rumours of a relationship first surfaced, but both parties categorically and repeatedly denied them.
Yes, indeed. Our reporters took to the streets this morning to see what you think about this ongoing Schofield saga and whether you believe ITV's excuse. They didn't know anything.
I think so, definitely. If you look at the BBC with Jimmy Savile and all the other scandals going on, they knew about it, I'm sure.
They're telling me that they couldn't find nothing about what just happened, and I think that's absolute rubbish. He's done a good job this morning, but overall, I don't think that's a good job.
Yeah, I just feel like it's all hard to believe, to be honest. Obviously, you've heard the rumours and that circulated online for a while, but I wasn't surprised when it personally came out because of that reason. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like they have been hiding something, you know what I mean? But I don't know.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure that the rumours would be getting round and they know exactly what was going on. I was really disappointed in Philip because I really liked him, and I think it's spoiled the effect. Holly, no, she hasn't done anything wrong, so why should she be punished or put off?
I mean, obviously there was talk about it before, and now it's all come out in the wash. But I don't know if he's still with that person or not. But disappointed in him that he wasn't honest and upfront.
Well, let's get some analysis from the PR expert, Mark Borkowski, no stranger to this programme. Morning, Mark. Two questions. Is there any possible comeback for Philip Schofield in any shape or form? And do you think Holly and This Morning has a long-term future as well?
I think it's very, very unlikely that Philip Schofield will find his way back onto mainstream TV. Listen, you never know. Life is very strange, and you know, there could be a format somewhere looking for him. But in terms of the size of audiences and the scale of television work he did, nothing like that. Holly is different. I mean, she's certainly a big hope for ITV, and I think they will be looking to protect her, and certainly her agent will be looking to protect her. She's got a host of really lucrative commercial deals, and living in the commercial TV space is much better to be a big star than perhaps being on the BBC, with all the sort of regulations now being thrust upon personalities. So I think that it's going to be difficult for her to come back to the sofa. I think they must rethink what This Morning is going to be without two anchoring hosts of that sort of scale. But I think that you wouldn't write off Holly Willoughby and the power that is vested behind her, because ultimately this is where it all started, when it came to be the place where they wanted to put their hope and future in. It was Holly, before all the sort of machinations of the soap opera became public.
Mark, I don't know if you saw Eamon's interview with Dan Wootton last night on GB News. What do you make of the revelations that came out of that?
Look, I don't know what is the truth. I mean, all I know that if you're working for a corporate organisation, you cannot start making decisions based on rumour. And if you put your talent in a room and you look them straight between the eyes and ask them a question and they deny it, then what do? And say, oh no, I've looked at the internet and I've looked at Twitter, I've looked at TikTok, and you're banged to rights. They're things like, you know, contracts. Now, with any organisation, there are always rumour and gossip. There's always tittle-tattle, whether it's a big television programme or, you know, some local business. So I think that, you know, Dan Wootton, whose figures are going through the roof at the moment, if you look at the internet and you look at Eamon, this is their moment, one would suggest, cynically, to tell their truth, but also to exploit this situation, as many other media organisations are doing. There's nothing better for business than a crisis. Where would we be? And particularly over a bank holiday where people are paralysed and not able to do anything. So we love a crisis, we love stories, and you know, they're pretty damning revelations. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people would say, you know, is there an element of sour grapes there? Or is there something more to that? No, I'm not dissing, you know, Eamon Holmes is a great broadcaster. Dan Wootton, you know, is a formidable force. So they have a lot of influence. And I think that's what's keeping the story running at the moment. But the question is, if this dies off, and there's nothing more add to it, the public and the media will get bored with it. The big question is there more to come? And I would bet my bottom dollar at the moment that there is a price, a bounty on the heads of other people very close to this to spill the beans. In the old days, where there was big money from tabloid newspapers, there would be a significant sum of money available for the person in question, who I believe is deep in hiding at the moment for his story. If that doesn't come out and this dissipates, and audience figures don't dive off, if share prices remain salient, you can ride this storm, but it does have to come back and does have to look different if it's going to regain, more importantly, above all, public trust. Public trust in the programme, that it's their friend. It's a significant part of the ITV morning architecture.
Mark, just one final very quick question for you. We do believe the young man in question is considering selling his story. What would your advice be to him? Would you advise him to sell that story, or just to keep quiet now?
Look, I've been in this business too many years, and the toxicity of fame, the toxicity of these situations, whether you're in public life, is corrosive. And we have seen recently the effects of toxic fame with people like Caroline Flack or whatever, where I think whoever is involved with this needs to do the best job for protecting this person from doing the wrong thing. And sometimes, mental health is far more valuable than the tens or 20s of thousands of pounds and the horrendous upturn in life that things are coming. I would, things are very, very different age now. And, those who make a pact with the devil have to live with that for the rest of their lives.
Great, thank you very much for joining us. That's Mark Borowski, a PR expert and brand.
He certainly is, yeah.
And really, actually very much food for thought there.
Well, Caroline Flack, she was involved in a scandal. She was the presenter of Love Island and she regrettably took her own life.
Yes.
Philip Stokofer's got good friends, he's got family,
yes.
He's a estranged wife and daughters, he's still close to them. Obviously we hope, but I still think this story has got further to run.
I think it's got further to come, but we do have to be aware that he has got a wife. He's got an 85-year-old mum. And I do feel, actually, as a woman, sorry for some of the women that have been dragged into this mess from no
poor
fault
old
of their own.
mum, Philip's mum, because not only is her son Philip imploding in public, but her other son has been sent to prison for 12 years for paedophilia.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be waking up seeing these papers every morning if I was her. Any case, still to come, pubs are appealing for more government support as energy bills soar to over 80%. We'll be speaking to one pub owner on what more can be done to help. You're with GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, How do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 11:26 with Andrew Pearce and Dawn Newsom on GB News. This is To The Point. The British pub culture is being threatened by the current energy crisis, with average publicans seeing their bills go up by 80% in the last year.
I like to say I'm doing my bit to save them, by the way.
Well done.
Pub owners like Mark Bridgen are calling for the government to take action to help with the enormous costs of operating their businesses.
So Mark is joining us from the Dog. Is it the Dog at Wingham in Kent? Mark, morning.
Morning.
It's energy, of course. If you can explain to viewers and listeners, why is energy such a big part of your overheads?
Well, you know, most people watching run a home and they'll be heating it and lighting it. Well, this is one massive home, and we have, 500 people dying here every week, and sort of 50 people stay here. And so, as you can imagine, our energy bills are critical and they're huge. Pre the crisis, we were around £3,000 a month for gas and electric. That was the average, and that worked. We're now seeing our bills each month anything between £7,000 and £10,000 for gas and electric.
That's tripled.
Yeah, I'm speaking to lots of companies, particularly obviously pubs, hotels, restaurants, and their bills have gone anything between 100 and 400% increase. Even down to, on my way here, getting the MOT done on my car, and theirs has gone from £100 a week to £400 a week. Yeah, it's all businesses, but hospitality's usage is very, very high, and so when it multiplies up, the numbers are staggering, and it's killing us. It's killing the industry.
No, go on, please.
Mark, what do you want the government to do to help you in particular?
Well, there was a price cap that came through, I think, now to the end of April, and that's diminished. I think that the biggest thing they could do to help us, because it's not just the utilities. The utilities is the headline inflation, but it's everything. As an industry, we used to have, all our wet products. We used to have an annual price increase. 1st of April, here's your prices for the year. That's gone out the window. We now get increases on a monthly basis. The foodstuffs that we buy, and we're not talking, a 3 to 5% increase. We've had some products go up 100% overnight, whether it be tomatoes, poultry went up 70%. Beef that we serve every Sunday for our amazing roast has gone through the roof, and we've finally buckled and put up the price of our roast lunch, which we hated to do. So it's everything is affecting us, everything we buy, and including, and I don't begrudge this, but obviously national minimum wage went up in April, so our wage bill's gone up 10%. We cannot put all our bills up like this, so I am begging the government to look at the VAT position again. That measure on the tail end of COVID really enabled us to come back from COVID. There's no doubt the help they gave us in COVID was phenomenal. And then the VAT decrease was an absolute godsend. But that's all going to be in vain. I know publicans walking out on a daily, weekly basis of their pubs, just giving the keys back to the brewery or to the landlord. And there's more and more going to be dying. And the government could very quickly, very easily, because we've seen them do it, if they just decrease the VAT as far as they can go, 20 to 10 would be epic. 5% would be out of this world. But even just to 15, just anything to put some margin into what we're doing to enable us to survive.
Mark, the pub is a quintessential part of English culture. Can I ask you bluntly how close you are to thinking how much longer you can continue at your lovely pub down there in Kent?
We're in quite a unique position. We're very, very lucky. My mother, she owns the building, so I don't pay the rent to her, and this is the latest thing that I'm doing, and not forever, but I don't have to pay myself every month. But that's not the case for most other publicans. I'm fortunate that we will survive. We can keep going in our amazing place, and we'll battle away. But there's loads. Most publicans, landlords and landladies, are family businesses, and they have a brewery that is their landlord, who quite rightly needs the rent. And I know lots of breweries, were great supporters through COVID, etc. But now, the money that landlords, families have been earning isn't going in their pockets. It's going into the utility companies' pockets. And so they're just, I know just literally up the road, landlord in a great pub, been there decades, planning on seeing out the next few years, topping up his pension. But that's just gone now. That money is now going to a utility company, so he's just left, and it's just rife. And for the government, it's a one-size solution on energy is really difficult. But they've shown us before that hospitality, they can overnight decrease the VAT. We can all account for it and run it properly, and then they could step in and save the industry. Like you said, quintessential part of British culture and lifestyle. That's why there was such a huge effort, I believe, to save it through COVID. Apart from all of the people that we employ, our little pub in the country, 30 incredible staff. They're amazing, best in the business, and we're pretty busy in these difficult times. But it's all in vain, because any penny we make is going out the door on the inflation that we're suffering. So, if the government step in, change the VAT position, it will enable many other businesses to keep going, keep employing people, and providing, a valued service to their communities.
Well, listen, Mark, best of luck with the business down there. Both Dawn and I do our bit to support pubs on a regular basis. She does start a bit earlier than me.
Yeah,
She's normally in there at 10 o'clock in the morning.
For breakfast.
I tend to be 10 at night for me.
For breakfast, obviously.
Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Right, still to come. PM Rishi Sunak says feminist professor Kathleen Stock should be allowed to deliver a speech at Oxford, even if they disagree with her.
Find out what she said shortly. That's after your morning news with Aaron Armstrong.
Hi there, it is 11:34. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. The Cabinet Office has told the COVID-19 inquiry it does not have unredacted messages sent by the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson during lockdown. However, a short time ago, Rishi Sunak said the government is carefully considering its position in response to handing over documents, but is confident in its approach. Now, previously, ministers refused to disclose those documents, arguing they're not obligated for unambiguously irrelevant material. Well, Inquiry Chair Baroness Hallett extended the deadline to hand over the documents from 4 p.m. this afternoon until Thursday. A spokesperson for the former Prime Minister, Mr Johnson, does not object, it says, to disclosing this evidence. Eamon Holmes has alleged there was a total cover-up of Philip Schofield's affair with a much younger male colleague at ITV's This Morning. Schofield quit the show on Friday and was dropped by his agency after admitting to an unwise but not illegal affair. In a GB News exclusive, former This Morning host Eamon Holmes described Schofield as a narcissist and of creating a toxic culture on the programme. He believes executives at ITV knew about the affair and covered it up to protect Philip and Holly Willoughby, as well as the brand.
I didn't know anything. I heard some rumours. Where were you going to go to with these rumours? Who? Everyone was team Philip and Holly. And they were there together, they were seen together, they were the brand.
In a statement earlier, ITV confirmed it did investigate rumours of a relationship between Schofield and a fellow employee, and both parties categorically and repeatedly denied the rumours, as did Schofield's agent at the time. And more on all of our stories on our website. It is gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2418 and 1.1572 euros. The price of gold, £1,574 and 58 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,600 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back. It is 10:40 and you're with To The Point on GB News.
Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says the feminist professor, do we have to call her feminist, Kathleen Stock, that's all rather brave and courageous and outspoken, should be allowed to deliver a speech at Oxford University urging students to engage with the academics' views on trans issues, even if they disagree with her.
This comes ahead of planned protests by trans activists. Actually, it's the LGBTQ plus community complaining about a lesbian making a speech.
Right.
Get a figure on that one. Any case, she's been targeted over her views on gender identity, purely because she pointed out there is a difference between gender identity and biological sex. And her speech tonight is definitely going to attract some protests.
Yeah. Kathleen Stock maintains she's a moderate and has the right to upset people. So we're asking this morning, should she be allowed to speak? Of course she should.
Our reporter Theo Chikomba joins us from Oxford now. Good morning, Theo. What's happening up there? What's the story coming from where you are?
Yes, good morning to you both. Well, this afternoon, hundreds of students are expected to protest against Professor Kathleen Stock coming here to speak, which she'll be doing so at the Union this afternoon around 5 o'clock. We're expecting hundreds of them who've been opposition in terms of what she's been saying over the last few years. This started a while back, actually. In 2018, the government launched a consultation into the Gender Recognition Act, and following that, Professor Kathleen decided to write about what she felt about that, and she received some criticism. And over the years, it spiraled all the way until 2021, where people were protesting outside of her University of Sussex, where she then had to leave that institution. And today, on a technical level, she's not doing a speech. Rather, what tends to happen in these occasions is sort of an opportunity where she sits down with someone and it's a question and answer. So before today, she said she hasn't prepared anything specifically as a speech, but she will be here, of course, to give her opinions on some of those controversial topics. Now, in a letter, the Oxford Union has written this, saying, we believe that trans students should not be made to debate their existence. We also refute that this is a free speech issue. Disinviting someone is not preventing them from speaking. And in response, Professor Stock said this: we are discussing how the demands of a radical group of trans activists, many of whom are not trans, affect other people. That is not the same thing. I am very clear that trans people deserve full protection under the law. Now, just in the last few days, there's been a rare intervention or opinion from the Prime Minister, and he said he supports her right to speak at the Oxford Union. So that will be taking place this afternoon, but we're expecting hundreds of students and others who are opposing her views.
Thank you very much, Theo. That's our reporter, Theo Chikomba, there from Oxford, where our Kathleen Stock is about to have having a debate tonight in Oxford. Nigel, we're going to come to you on this one. What do you make of the protest that is still going to happen? They're allowing her to speak and debate, but there is still going to be a protest about her right to free speech.
Yes, and I think that that she has the right to free speech, so it's absolutely right that she is able to speak at the Oxford Union. Those who disagree with her have the right to protest about that. The important thing is that she wasn't cancelled.
Exactly that.
But many have been.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, I'm always opposed to people being cancelled, especially at universities. And the one place where students should get a range of different views to make up their own minds. So I always object to anybody who is being cancelled, unless they're guilty of hate speech or something like that. Yeah. But I mean, the important thing is people also have the right to protest. If they want to disagree with her, have a peaceful protest of the fact that she's there, that's fine too.
I think it's astonishing that we are now having to unveil a actual director of speech and academic freedom, Professor Arif Ahmed is his name, in Cambridge, and we have to have somebody.
I know.
Appointed to defend the role of free speech.
It should be automatic.
Yeah, the Prime Minister has to appoint some from the ranks of universities because these students have just lost their way.
Well, they've been radicalised, haven't they? And it's actually, I'm really glad this is happening, but also we need to, it's in primary schools, in nurseries, where this trans ideology is starting to be kind of given in stories and books and that. And I think it's wrong. I really think it's wrong. We should not be teaching this to our children. We should wait till they're adults and then they can have this, like you said, a debate and a conversation about it. Yeah. So there's a lot here that needs to be sorted out and quite quickly.
Interesting to see how much of a protest there is today.
Yeah.
And let's hope she gets to make her speech.
Catherine,
It'd be appalling if she isn't.
Well, I mean, it was meant to be a question and answer session, but Catherine has always said, you know, there has to be a way of rising above the personal and the culture of victimhood that here, and you know, the have a debate without the hate, which is.
Yeah. But the hate is so vicious. That's the problem. That's what needs to be regulated and stopped.
Well, it's driven her out of her job.
It has.
At a university, and while I'm a huge admirer of J.K. Rowling, she's insulated because she's got nearly £1 billion in the bank. She's one of the world's most successful authors, deservedly.
Absolutely.
So it's, in a sense, although she's been very brave, it's easier for her to be braver.
Yeah, it is easier because but thank goodness for her, because she does give a lot of support to a lot of other people that just want to have the debate. That's all. Just have the conversation.
We're talking about something that should be an open and honest debate has led to Catherine having to install security devices and even hire security guards on her home, where she lives with her partner and her baby daughter.
Yeah.
Terrible, isn't it?
That's where we are at with that one. Should we cheer us up, Nigel? Not by talking about Just Stop Oil. Here we go. This is in the Daily Mail today. What's happening now with Just Stop Oil?
Well, what is happening is that one of Just Stop Oil's donors has also become a donor to the Labour Party. And this is Dale Vince, who runs a company called Excentricity. This is sort of billed as Britain's... He's now given the Labour Party £1.5 million in a donation. Understandably, Tories are up in arms about this.
Not just Tories, Nigel.
Well, saying that the Labour Party shouldn't accept this money. However, the whole issue of party funding is really murky. The Tories accept a lot of money from slightly questionable Russians, for instance. So when it comes down to it, do we let political parties take private donations, or do we get the taxpayer to fund political parties?
We don't want state-funded political parties.
We don't want taxpayer-funded.
But don't you think, I mean, Nigel says the Tories are unhappy. I think anybody who's been stuck in traffic...
Everyone is
all
unhappy.
The protests that people who haven't been able to get to work, to hospital appointments, because of these fanatics from Just Stop Oil. Isn't he, by taking money from this organisation, putting himself on the side of the eco-fanatics?
He is going to be a puppet to his paymasters to the tune of 1.5 million.
Yeah.
And as our own very lovely Jacob Rees-Mogg said, they are fanatics. They want us to be cold. They want us to be poor.
Yeah.
And this is what the head of the Labour Party is condoning, who is supposed to be for poor working-class people. And we know this whole agenda is just going to make people poorer, colder, suffer more. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I know Nigel's going to scream that it does. It just doesn't work. I mean...
Scream, Nigel.
Thank you, I will scream. First of all, it's not the Labour Party taking money from Just Stop Oil.
It's taking it from one of Just Stop Oil's biggest benefactors.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Well, no, it's not the same.
Well, I don't think we won't see the difference.
The Labour Party is taking money from the boss of a big electricity company. That boss, who believes in green energy, happens to be also funding Just Stop Oil.
Yeah.
So they're separate things.
Not very separate.
When you then link that to Labour policy, which is to stop new developments of oil and gas in the North Sea, then the Tories start screaming that this policy is being influenced.
Just Stop Oil.
Policy comes first, then we get the donation. So it doesn't mean that all political donations are a problem, but this one is no more a problem.
I don't think it quite works that way. I think if you're going to give £1.5 million, then you're going to want your opinions and your policy infiltrated into that party's policy. But the big point is this green agenda...
Do they get their policies into the Tory
We're not having... possibly, who knows? I'm not going to disagree. That's not what we're discussing now. We are talking about this whole green agenda, which is going to make this country poorer and weaker in every single way. It makes no sense at all. And let's not forget that Dale Vince has a green energy company.
Yeah.
Doesn't that get subsidies from the government? I mean, the reason that our bills and everything is so expensive, that our oil and our gas and everything is so expensive at the moment, is because we're subsidising all these projects for green energy, which are never going to work.
And what is that big green thing Starmer's launching as part of his 5 pledges? Green... What is it?
Well, he's launching a UK energy, a sort of green energy company.
I bet our Stop Oil man's rather pleased with that, isn't he?
Well, I'm sure he is, in fact, because what Keir Starmer is saying is that we should be... electricity should be clean by 2030, steel production should be clean by 2035.
Yeah.
He's setting a target for net zero of 2050. The question, obviously, is, do you believe in net zero? If you do, then Labour policies are going in the right direction.
It's easy to have all those targets, Nigel, if you're a billionaire like this particular businessman. He's not going to feel any hardship financially in any shape or form.
No,
he's an incredibly rich man.
Yes, but what's that got to do with it?
Well, no, you're saying that he was setting these targets. Well, it doesn't...
No, Keir Starmer is.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not talking about this chap. No, this is the Labour policy, which is the idea that we get economic growth by effectively greening Britain, starting up greener technologies, greener industries to
But also,
take us towards net zero.
Keir Starmer has also said that we're not going to renew any of the contracts for oil for gas and everything like that. So all that's going to happen is going to, as I said, it's going to make us weaker as a country because these green agendas, they're not going to work. We're not going to be able to get any energy from them. So we're going to have to buy in. I mean, we'll be all green and lovely, but we're having to buy in from everybody else. So it doesn't actually make... Exactly.
Maybe from Russia.
Maybe from Russia, but it's not making the world greener, is it? It's just hypocrisy and rubbish.
This debate finally comes down to, it really is, do you believe in climate change?
No.
Do you believe in going towards net zero and setting the target of 2050 or not? If you don't believe in any of those things, then you won't like any of this.
I would keep the North Sea oil as a form of an insurance policy. So because of the terrible crisis we've had because of the Ukraine war, you can still mine those fields in the North Sea for gas and oil, and I think we should.
Can I just say that climate-related deaths is the lowest it's ever been since the 1920s. So, you know, it's lower than it was in 1920. So, you know, non-climate-related deaths like earthquakes, tsunamis and volcanoes, but climate-related deaths is the lowest it's ever been. So how is the climate affecting people's lives? They're going to die, like the people that we have on this show to comment on that. They come up with these great lines that are lies and rubbish that they've just made up.
Don't you think really, Nigel, deep down, this is a mistake to take this money from the Stop Oil bloke?
No, I don't. I mean,
I think it'll play really badly with voters.
I am uncomfortable with party funding, as I've just said. But as long as you've got this system, I can't see anything more wrong about taking it from Dale Vince than the Tories do from some of their people.
While we're on the subject of green energy, and I think Starmer did want to sort of like concrete over the green belt. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Only a little bit of it.
Only a little bit of it. That's fine then.
Okay. But what is
just quickly. Also, this is a story in The Guardian. Nigel, your story. Labour to let councils buy land cheaply. So basically they can just gerrymander.
Yeah, the idea is to actually be able to compulsory purchase it. Now, the system we've got at the moment, one of the biggest problems about building is you get land banking, where a developer gets hold of the land, gets planning permission on it, but never builds anything. So the land is just left fallow. You also get a situation where developers do start doing a little bit of developing, and every time they get nudged, they put another brick wall up. But again, houses don't get built. So what this would mean is local authorities, who should be the best people to decide where to build in their area rather than have national targets, get to actually look at this land and say, right, we're going to build on that land. If you won't let us, we'll compulsory purchase.
That's not the only thing, is it? They're trying to buy land without having to factor in the hope value. So they're trying to buy it cheaply. So basically, you know, when you buy a piece of land, my husband's an architect, I know this, if you buy a house or buy something, you buy it with a hope that you're going to be able to get some... you could build on it, planning permission, things like that. So what they want to do is they want to be able to buy that land without that extra bit of the planning permission. So it overwrites the 1961 Land Compensation Act, which prevents councils from buying plots of land for development for just the agricultural value, without the planning value. They're just trying to take land off people.
Unfortunately, Tonya, I'm going to have to say, stop it, you lot, honestly.
It's Marxist.
Thank you very much, Nigel Nelson. Thank you, Nigel Nelson and Tonya Buxton, for that interesting debate there. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our show. It's really flown by again. Thank you so much for watching. Coming up next is GB News Live with Mark Longhurst. This is To The Point, and we'll be back tomorrow, provided I can keep you quiet, at 9:30. Thank you for watching and have a lovely afternoon.
See you then.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain.
Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid.